So I guess whenever you guys are ready, I'm ready.
Okay, let her rip. Roll it.
All right. Rob, Bob, thanks for coming on. If you guys want to introduce yourselves and just so everyone gets to know who you are and kind of what your affiliation is in the organization, just so they have an idea of what we're talking about, that'd be great.
Okay, go ahead, Bob. All right, thank you for having us. I'm Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida Fairtax Educational Association. And I'm kind of the driving force behind the Fairtax Power Radio. Started out as a podcast, and now it's a video podcast every week. And we just keep on plugging along, trying to educate as many people as we can about the Fairtax, one person at a time, because we're convinced that once people understand it, they'll demand it. Yep, that's true. And I'm Ron Maiellaro. Bob and I live on opposite ends of town. The county we live in is pretty big. It's actually bigger than Rhode Island, but we get together every other week and record a couple of shows. I'm a retired school teacher, and after that, my wife and I actually drove commercial truck for a while. So we learned about the Fairtax by listening to Neil Bortz on the radio, and the more we heard about it, the better we liked it. And then when the book came out in 2005, I bought the book and read it and said, wow, this really makes a lot of sense. And my wife agreed with me, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we started off volunteering in this area, like I said, Marion County. And then we became Marion County coordinators and then district directors. And this is how I met Bob. Bob is one of the people who sent me an email. He says, I'm retired now. I love the Fairtax, and I'd like to help in any way I can. And like he said, he's been the moving force behind Fairtax Power Radio. Mm-hmm. And slowly but surely, we're getting out there to more people because that's our goal. Because as Bob says, we understand that when people truly know the Fairtax, they're gonna like it better than the current income tax.
That's awesome, and it's so funny. I feel like I kind of fell into the same kind of cycle you guys did, where I heard about it from my old economics teacher, and he even kind of was like, oh, it was the Fairtax flat. I can't remember, but like here's the book, or here's the link to the book that I had to go digging for it. It was almost kind of this lost little treasure. So then I discovered Neil Bortz as well, read his book, subsequently started the second one, and yeah, I thought this was great. It was at a time where I was kind of like, as a thought experiment, I thought of what would my kind of tax plan look like, and it was very similar to this Fairtax. So it was really cool how you discover these things and how they can get lost. Yeah. Apparently this was a big.
Yeah, well, the Fairtax was.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, I was saying the Fairtax was hatched by a bunch of businessmen out in Houston who commissioned a slate of economists and gave them a blank sheet of paper and says, just devise me the best tax system you can possibly come up with. Only restriction is that it has to raise the same amount of money for the government as the current income tax does. Mm-hmm. What they came up with, it was not called the Fairtax right out of the box, but that name was applied to it later when someone described it to somebody and said, hey, that's a fair tax. So if you came up with the same thing that these learned economists did, it must be a pretty good idea.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. So let's get started into the meat of the subject matter. I want to start with asking you both, what do you think the current state of our tax conditions are that you think warrant or require changes like the Fairtax?
Oh, you got all day? Yeah.
Top two or whatever.
Hours to go through. The biggest problems with the income tax, I would say two of them. It is incredibly unfair because it is filled with loopholes and deductions and exemptions and special tax treatment for people who can afford the lobbyists to buy those things. And the other is it is evaded out the wazoo. There are billions of dollars that are owed that are not collected by the income tax. And so those are probably the two biggest problems with it I can come up with, but I can go all day with what's wrong with the income tax. No, Bob is absolutely right. The current income tax system, Congress tries to make it progressive, meaning that the big earners pay more. But just as he says, they also put all these legal loopholes in there so that if you can afford the tax attorneys and the knowledgeable people, you can structure your income and your spending and so forth so that you can actually pay zero taxes even though you earn a great deal of money. It's possible. Meanwhile,
you guys pull that off.
yeah. Meanwhile, the people who are just getting by, they got to pay the payroll tax, on their paychecks, which is the most regressive system tax that there is. So yeah, it's a very unfair system, and the evasion is up to over 20%. Believe it or not, 1 in 5 people who are supposed to be paying the income tax are not, and that's a serious, serious problem.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very good. One of the things my biggest gripe with it is that the tax code, when you include just the code itself, you have revenue rulings and court cases that all apply to the law that you'd have to, if you were a lawyer, you'd have to know all this stuff to actually apply it in any meaningful way. You're looking at over 70,000 pages of paperwork. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no human, and I think this is the root cause of why you see all these loopholes, because now we're not even talking about loopholes where maybe you can do this or that, but you're talking about interpretations. You're talking about all these loose ends where really all it comes down to is, does this person like this other person? Can this person get away with it where we don't like this person, so we'll go after him. We'll use the IRS to go after him, but our buddies, we'll let them go and do whatever and give them all the breaks and loopholes, as we'll call it. But there's no real concrete answers on how stuff is to be done. I think that's by design. You see that in other aspects of federal law.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Absolutely. The tax code is so incredibly complicated. I mean, way back in the 80s, Money Magazine did a study. They created a hypothetical family and asked 50 different tax preparers what this family owes in federal tax. And from 50 different professional tax preparers, they got 49 different answers.
I remember that.
There is just no way that the tax code can be interpreted, the same way by everybody.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think you're right. I think you're onto something, that the complication is by design. I know that there are, let's put it this way. The members of Congress, the House and the Senate, 50% of them are millionaires. And many of these people became millionaires while serving in Congress. And you probably remember what Harry Truman said: you can't get rich in politics unless you're a crook. These people make a business of selling off portions of the tax code and then gathering very nice campaign contributions, which when they finally retire from Congress is all theirs. It's a terribly incestuous system.
And
as you say, terribly complex, so that when we sign our 1040 every year, and we're attesting that we understand everything in the tax code, that's not possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I always wondered, when you sign your W-2 and everything, when you're going to pay your taxes, you're signing like everything is completely true, and that, and I'm just like, I have no idea if this is true or not, honestly, and I think that's how everyone feels. We have no idea if this is right or not.
Just do the best you can.
Yeah.
Buy the software, put it on the computer, and hope for the best.
I know. And even then, you can still get in trouble, and they can still come after you almost a decade later in some cases.
Yeah. And that's another problem. If they do come after you, forget the Bill of Rights. You're guilty. You are guilty, and you have to prove yourself innocent. Why? How did the Constitution get turned upside down because of our tax code?
Well, that's true. It's a great question. You see that in a lot of other aspects of federal activity, I think. And it's interesting where it's almost like when the IRS comes after you, it's different than I think other kinds of situations where the government interferes in your life. What initially happens is that they come after you, and now you're almost spending in some cases your entire life savings defending yourself. And then, at the end of it, even if you're innocent, you have nothing. You've sold all your assets to fight, to clear your name. And it's almost just it's almost as if the process is the punishment now, and not the idea of we're going to punish you after we determine you're guilty. Like you said, it's as if you're already guilty and you're being punished now, going through this process. So either way, you kind of lose. Either you're guilty and then your life is over, or even if you somehow win, you're starting your life over in terms of your life savings. You're starting over again, essentially.
That's true.
And the big problem is that the one that is accusing you of this is the judge and jury. They get to decide who's right.
So Ron's right. The Bill of Rights just flies out the window with the IRS, which is one of the biggest reasons it needs to be thrown on the scrap heap of history, and the income tax needs to be replaced with a fair tax.
Absolutely. So that's a good segue, I think, to the, let's talk about the good stuff now. So what's the main purpose, the main idea, the goal of the fair tax in general?
Well, the goal of the fair tax is to replace the income tax. That's what it's designed to do. But it's designed to, one of the design parameters was that it must raise the same amount of money for the government as the income tax does. Do it in a fair, open, transparent way. Every time you buy something, you will get a receipt showing you how much government is costing you. Mm-hmm. The cost of government is just hidden from we the people under the current system. So the fair taxes wants to get rid of an unfair, incredibly complicated, corrupt system and replace it with something that's open and transparent and applies equally to everybody.
So let's talk about it. For people that don't know what the fair tax is, what does this look like for them? Like just the broad overview of what they would expect it to be.
Well, you can forget about the 1040 or any kind of an income tax return because there would be no income tax, no inheritance, any form of the federal income tax. They would all be gone, which means you also don't need the IRS. So you don't have the IRS breathing down your neck. Mm-hmm. So anything to do with the current federal income tax would be gone. It's very difficult to conceptualize this because we've had it for over 100 years. It's all we've known in terms of federal taxation for all this time. But instead, it would be replaced with a sales tax. Now, 45 of the 50 states have a state sales tax. You go to the store, you buy something, or you pay for a service, you pay the plumber. Sales tax is included. You write the check. The tax is paid automatically because it's included with the bill. Mm-hmm. And that's what the fair tax is. It's simply a sales tax that you would pay when you buy a new product or pay for a service. It's simply a sales tax. And the income tax, everything you're dealing with the income tax now is gone. It's out of your life forever.
Okay. Anything to add to that?
Well, I think the fair tax gets mischaracterized a lot. As Ron was saying, folks are just their thinking is locked inside the box that we've got this income tax, and that's all that's never going to go away. People have a hard time understanding the concept that the fair tax is going to replace the income tax, and it's often demagogued as a new tax that's going to be charged on top of everything else, which is just not true at all. So people hear the fair tax, and it's a fairly hefty sales tax, of course, because it's replacing the income tax. But people hear about this huge new sales tax, and they recoil in horror before they realize it's going to replace the income tax. It's going to get rid of withholding. It's going to get rid of the federal payroll taxes for Social Security and Medicare. You'll bring home your full gross amount with the fair tax, and you'll pay your taxes when you buy things, when you spend your money, not when you make it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that part of it, once you wrap your head around that, it starts to make a lot of sense. Like I said, 45 of the 50 states have a sales tax. So most people in the country are familiar with a sales tax. Mm-hmm. And in some places, like I'm originally from New York, they had every kind of tax you could think of.
Tell me about it.
State sales tax, county sales tax. I think New York City has its own sales tax. People are familiar with the sales tax. It's simple. There's not a big deal, except for griping about how, what the rate is. A sales tax is very, very simple. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're proposing is a very simple, easy to understand sales tax.
What's funny is that
there's going to be
go ahead.
There's going to be a huge difference between the fair tax and the sales taxes that people are used to now. Because the sales taxes now we call those exclusive. They are added on to the price of an item when you take it to the cash register. An 8% sales tax turns a $100 item on the shelf into a $108 item at the register. Mm-hmm. The fair tax is going to be like the taxes that are collected on fuel, included in the price.
So the Fairtax will not change a $100 item on the shelf to a $123 item at the register. The Fairtax is included in the price, but unlike the taxes you pay on fuel, you will see on your receipt how much Fairtax you're paying on every purchase.
Yeah, that's actually one of the myths I remember that they talked about, where someone was suggesting that it was actually going to be 30% instead of 23% when they did this kind of math. And it's just like you said, it's the difference between inclusive and exclusive taxes. It's a matter of where the tax is included in the price, whether before.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that people have to twist the Fairtax into something that it isn't in order to make an argument against it.
Yeah, we've heard that 30% a lot because people use it. Well, people like lobbyists who have a vested interest in the current tax system, and they're really afraid of the fair tax. So they will. Bob and I know of one guy in particular. We're not going to mention names, but anyways, because we haven't heard from him in a while, anyways. But yeah, he said that. Oh, it's not 23%; it's 30%. Okay, as Bob said, you buy a $100 item. $23 of it is for the fair tax, and the other $77 is for the item you purchase. Now, you can, if you want to, call that 30%. Say, well, 23% of $77 is 30%. You can look at it that way if you want to, but is there a dollar difference in calling it 23% inclusive or 30% exclusive? No, you're paying the same amount of money.
Yeah, that's the end of the day. You're paying $100, so that's it.
Yeah. So it's an argument for the sake of arguing. Doesn't really make any sense.
And I was just thinking as you guys were describing this that one of the big issues that conservatives and people on the right typically have with government is like how much they're spending, and how you said this right in the beginning that the fair tax makes this very transparent to the consumer, to the people basically.
Yeah.
And how people, if they're like, oh my goodness, this tax is huge, why do we have it this high? And it's like, well, this is what our current spending levels are at. This is what the government is currently spending. And, for us in our lives, when we look at a high price, we go, oh, I'm not buying that. Or we're not doing, we say, no, we got to figure out another way. So it's almost kind of bringing in real economics to our lives as it relates to government spending. It makes it, a reality test and not this abstract thing that we don't really understand, that we don't feel.
Yeah, unfortunately, the government is spending a lot more than they're taking in.
Oh, absolutely.
The fair tax, again, will take in just what the income tax is taking. So the debate on how to spend it and the debate on whether we're spending too much or stuff will still happen. The fair tax just simply changes the way the revenue is raised, not the way it's spent.
Yes, exactly. That's basically how I've been explaining it to people, is that it's just changing the mechanism by which they collect it, which is,
exactly.
And the thing is, I like that because you can't take on so many battles all at the same time. Like the battle for spending, the battle for whatever else it is. All of those are different battles, and they're going to require its own monumental effort to kind of get people on board with that stuff. So it's good that we're focusing on just this one aspect of it.
But the nice thing is that when the fair tax passes and becomes law, Congress will no longer have to spend any time on manipulating the tax code to benefit their friends and punish their enemies. The tax code will be out of their hands. They can then concentrate on how they're spending our money. And they need to concentrate on that, don't you think?
Well, I don't know if I want them concentrating on that. No, I know what you're saying, though. It frees them up. It gives them a little more time to deal with more serious issues,
Yeah. So
the scope of this thing is one of the things we do on Fairtax Power Radio is we keep an eye on Congress.gov. They got a little search function in there. You type in the string Internal Revenue Code and close that in quotes and search on that, and you'll get back how many hits there are where the Congress critters are trying to amend the Internal Revenue Code. There are close to 1,000. You do that there. They're close to 1,000 hits on that search now when you're looking for proposals that they're putting forth to change the tax code.
I looked it up this morning, Bob. 990. So like you say, now this is only August of the first year of the 116th Congress. These these Congress critters are on track to propose. I'm saying if they keep going at this rate, they're going to have 3,000 proposals to change the tax code by the end of the 116th Congress. Now, fortunately, very few of those will actually become law, but some of them will, and every one of them will make the tax code more complicated.
Mm-hmm. And all the while, like average citizens like us, I mean, well, you guys are paying attention to it, but someone like me and people I know, I mean, we're not paying attention to this stuff at all whatsoever.
Right. That's why they get away with it, because nobody's paying attention.
I mean, when you throw 70,000 pages plus stuff like this, 900 amendments to it, it's like, who has time for that?
So there's one of the couple of the episodes that Bob and I did a couple of months ago is in the second Fairtax book that Bortz and Linder published. Mm-hmm. Fairtax Answering the Critics. We call it the red book because it's got a red cover.
Yep.
And I think it's the last chapter. They, after spelling out all the details of the Fairtax and responding to some of the criticism and so forth, mm-hmm. he has a chapter in which he has a scenario where all you've known your whole life is the Fairtax. You've never lived under a federal income tax. And he explains how life would be different. You know, you've never known an income tax return. You've never had any agency such as the IRS and so forth. And then along comes a politician who wants to get rid of that 23% sales tax and replace it with a really simple income tax. And Bob and I did those two episodes. And, of course, Bob has to be the innocent victim, and I have to be the devious congressperson. All right?
It's my show. I'll do what I want.
That's true. And I thought that came out. That is a really good way of demonstrating how simple and wonderful the Fairtax is compared to what we have. Mm-hmm. Because this congressman has to jump through hoops to try to convince this guy to get rid of the Fairtax and replace it with an income tax, mm-hmm. with a tax on this and a tax on that and the IRS, and forget the Bill of Rights and all that.
Yeah. You know, unfortunately, how these things usually happen, I think, as far as the history goes, from at least as far as I'm aware, it starts out with something very small. You know, they don't go for the, hey, we're passing a new tax law and it's 70,000 pages plus all this other stuff. They go, oh, no, it's just this one thing. And then it takes, about 100 years to get to where we're at. It's just slow incremations, what's the word I'm looking for? Invasions into our liberty, basically, and into our wallets, more specifically. So
that's true.
That's the devious part about it, is that they've dabbled in it. In the past.
That's how the income tax first came into existence. It was unconstitutional prior to 1913.
Yeah.
They had to pass a constitutional amendment to allow the federal government to collect an income tax. And when they were pushing for that authority, this is just going to be a really small tax, and it's only going to hit the really, super rich folks. It's not going to affect you. So go ahead and give us this ability, because it's not going to hurt you at all. And within 30 years, from 1913 to 1943, it was affecting everybody, and they were taking money out of your paycheck before you got it. That's when withholding started during World War II. So it took a lot less than 100 years to get from a tiny little tax that's only going to hit a few people to something that's just in everybody's lives, and it's taking your money before you get it. That's just insane.
Yeah.
Well, let's get. I want to get into the. I guess what it's going to look like for maybe people are listening and they're thinking, oh, okay, all this intellectual, this and that, this is supposed to do this. What's it going to look like for me? If I'm a, just an average citizen, what's going to happen? It sounds to me like I'm going to go to the store. We have this new sales tax. Our price is going to go. What's it going to look like for consumer prices?
Well,
consumer prices are not going to change all that much, because consumer prices today contain the embedded costs of the income tax system. So when you take out that component from consumer prices and replace it with a fair tax, there's not going to be a great deal of change in consumer prices.
Now, I think this is a key concept, I think, here that is worthwhile explaining. Do you think you can go into detail on what embedded taxes are so people understand?
Oh yeah. Right now, every new product and every service you pay for has, on average, a 22% higher cost because of the income tax. Now, corporations right now have to pay taxes. They have to keep up with the tax code. So not only do they pay taxes, but they have to pay an account. I mean, if it's a small company, my wife and I had a small company a while back, all right? We had an accountant who we had to pay a certain amount of money every year to make sure our bookkeeping was accurate and to file the taxes and send us the K-1, all that stuff. So it costs us. But for the big corporations, like GE and so forth, they have mega costs. So keeping up with the tax code and making sure that you're taking advantage of all legal loopholes, because if you're in business and you're paying more tax than you should, that's not a good business policy. If it's legal to reduce your tax burden, then you should do it. And the big corporations, they can have batteries of tax attorneys to help them do that. However, it does cost them, and guess who pays for those costs? Every cost that a company bears is paid for by their customers and or their employees or shareholders. Always.
Yeah, and people instinctively understand that when you buy a product, that the cost of the labor and the materials that go into getting that product are included in the retail price that the customer pays. But somehow it just doesn't register that the income taxes that the companies have to pay, the compliance costs that they have to pay, all of that stuff is just another cost of doing business that gets rolled into the price of the consumer products. So that's really what we mean by embedded taxes. These costs that companies incur because of the income tax system that they have to pass on to their customers. That's really the definition of embedded taxes.
Yeah, that's where we come up with it. That's been estimated. It's more for some industries and less for others, but on average, it's about 22% across the country. Yep. So, like I said, everything you purchase right now is on average 22% higher, more expensive because of the tax code. So when we get rid of the income tax, most of that disappears. So the cost of doing business, the cost of creating these products and services is going to come down.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then you replace those embedded costs with a Fairtax, and it's pretty much a wash for the consumer.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what does that look like? So for the prices will go down. So I guess for business owners and sellers, you'll also see kind of the same thing. Your costs go down, and therefore allowing you to provide these lower prices. In addition to lower prices, but then in addition to the tax itself, does it affect like anything on kind of like the wholesale side? Is anything going on? From not from a consumer retail perspective, but maybe the wholesale seller perspective.
Yeah, the wholesale prices will drop dramatically because they will no longer be subject to any tax liability or their compliance costs go down to next to nothing. So, again, the Fairtax is applied only at the retail level. So if you're in a wholesale business selling to other businesses, then you don't have to deal with the tax system at all under the Fairtax.
Yeah, because one thing we need to make clear, like Bob just said, the Fairtax is paid at the retail level by the person buying for and paying for the product or service. It's paid for by the individuals. Corporations will not pay the Fairtax. All right, and business-to-business purchases will not be subject to the Fairtax, because if you do that, you start creating this embedded cost system again.
Yeah,
we don't want to do that. So, and some people recoil in horror. Oh, corporations don't pay taxes? That's not fair. They have to pay their fair share. All right, you have to understand, like Bob said before, corporations don't pay taxes. I don't know how many times I heard boards say this. Corporations don't pay taxes. You do. People do. It's a cost of doing business. It's passed on to the consumer. We are the ones that pay the corporate taxes. So we're going to make this simple. And this is one of the things that really benefits the corporations, the businesses, is their compliance costs are going to come way down. Not only are they going to not worry about an income tax, that's going to go away, but in most cases, many cases anyways, the compliance costs are worse than the income tax itself, and that's what drives their prices up. So that's going to come down. It's going to make it easier for them to do business, which means they do more business, which means they hire more people.
Awesome, good stuff. What does it look like for like the average person who is thinking, okay, prices are going to be lower, or sellers? What about me? What about I'm a steel worker. I'm a plumber. What is it going to look like for me in my life? Like, I hear that it doesn't. Now, do I get my full paycheck? I mean, what's going on here? There's going to be no deductions from it. Can this be real?
Well, yeah, that's the big thing. For individuals, withholding goes away because the income tax goes away. Mm-hmm. And the Fairtax also replaces the payroll taxes for Social Security and Medicare. But right now, Social Security and Medicare are being supported only by people working for a paycheck. Mm-hmm. You make your living someplace else, you're not contributing a dime to those systems. So the Fairtax will get rid of the payroll taxes, spread the tax base for Social Security and Medicare from just people working for a paycheck to everybody that buys things. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing that the individuals are going to see with the Fairtax is no withholding, no payroll taxes, and then no tax returns. You don't have to share the intimate details of your personal finances with the government. Mm-hmm. And you will get a tax refund every month. Once a year with the current income tax, maybe, if your withholding exceeds your tax liability. But the Fairtax, we haven't talked about this, has a feature called the prebate, which is a refund of the taxes that will be collected from you that you don't owe, because under the Fairtax, you don't owe a dime until you have taken care of your family, until your spending rises above the poverty level for your household size. Mm-hmm. So you get back the amount of tax that you'll pay on that level of spending. So you don't take any money out of your pocket with a Fairtax until your spending rises above the poverty level.
Yeah. Now this prebate is a very, very important concept. So let's elaborate on that a little bit.
Absolutely.
Some people, when they first hear this, they say, "Oh, that's just another entitlement." No, it's not. You can consider it a tax refund, just like you submit your 1040, by April 15th. And you paid a little too much, and you get a refund. It's exactly like that. It's a tax refund, because the concept here is the technical name is the family consumption allowance. Mm-hmm. And the concept behind it is that nobody should have to pay taxes on what it costs to stay alive. So let's say you got a typical family, mom and dad, 2 kids, and you have a certain, according to Health and Human Services, I'm trying to do this from memory now. I think it's $33,800 to maintain a family of 4. Mm-hmm. Right? And so, yes, the Fairtax will be charged on every new product and service. So that family of 4 will pay for the Fairtax when they go to the store and buy groceries and buy clothing, mm-hmm. and provide shelter, rent or a house payment or something like that. Okay. But because the concept of no one should have to pay taxes for what it costs to stay alive, there's this prebate that Bob mentioned. Mm-hmm. And that is going to be a refund at the beginning of the month, hence the name prebate, mm-hmm. that will relieve you of the taxes up to the poverty level. So again, that typical family of 4, and again, this figure, $33,820, comes from Health and Human Services. That's what they say is the minimum amount necessary to maintain a family of 4 in this mm-hmm. country. Well, 23% of that, let's say they spend their money only on the basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter. 23% of that is $7,779. They're going to get that back in monthly increments of $648. So on top of getting rid of the payroll tax and the income tax, every legal household in this country is going to get the prebate, which is based only on the number of people in that household. It has nothing to do with their income. So they could be struggling to get by, they could be mega wealth, doesn't make any difference. If it's a family of 4, they're going to get $648. That's the figures for 2019. Mm-hmm. All right. So when you look at the loss of the income tax, get rid of the IRS, no payroll tax, no income tax. And then you get the prebate on top of that. Everything, even if prices do go up somewhat, every family in this country is going to have more purchasing power when you balance what happens to the price of products with the prebate. Every family is going to have more purchasing power because now every person who goes to the store and buys something is helping to pay the Fairtax.
Now, I recall there being like kind of a spectrum. So, like, because you mentioned household of 4 people. Does this include, like, if you're like a single person, you're just living in a house or renting a house, and let's say, you just turned 18? Does it still apply?
Yep.
Do you still get that same prebate?
If you're a single person, you get $239 because according to Health and Human Services, a single adult requires $12,490 to maintain.
Gotcha.
And they would be paying. And if they spent that all on the basic necessities, they would be spending $28.73 a year, which works out to $239 a year. I'm sorry, a month. To $239 a month.
Yeah. I assume it's all relative to whatever HHS says is the standard of the poverty level. Basically, it changes with the standards that the HHS defines as. Is basically the idea of it.
Yeah. So the prebate is a very important concept, and it's worth people studying because it's not an entitlement. It is, as Bob indicated, it is a refund. That's all it is. Just like we get tax refunds now, you can think of the prebate as the same thing. There's nothing unusual about it. But without the prebate, the Fairtax would never pass Congress because without the prebate, it would be considered regressive, and it would hurt the poor more and unduly hurt the poor. And we can't do that, okay? We want to make sure that those people that are just getting by are getting by, and they have a chance to better themselves.
Do you think that, though, even if you didn't have the prebate, if you got rid of the embedded taxes and then kind of replaced it, would it still... Oh, no, you're right, because the price would then be roughly the same, and then it would disproportionately affect them. You're correct.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what do you think, and this is kind of this is just an idea I've had on the spot. Part of my earlier plan that I made had an idea where instead of you give a prebate to people, you have like a tax exemption kind of status, and with that comes all this other, I guess we'll call it government intervention, this responsibility now. It's like, well, we're going to take care of you, but we're gonna kind of you're gonna if you want to be on the government dime, you're going to have like a government nanny kind of following you around, sort of thing. So I thought it was funny.
I'm from the government, and I'm here to help you. Those are some of the most fearsome words in the English language.
Yeah, we're not gonna you're not gonna starve in the street. You're going to be provided for it, but you're going to have to, if you want to spend money or if you want this or that, like you're going to have to go to your nanny first and see if it's okay or not. And to me, it was kind of an incentive to help people get off of things, but at the same time, keep them alive and healthy and happy and so on. What do you think the benefits, or I don't know, what are your thoughts on comparing a prebate to like a tax exemption status for people who find themselves in a bad situation?
I think a prebate is a really straightforward, simple, foolproof method. If you start trying to give some people exemptions or some product exemptions and some others, you're opening up to a lot more complexity. You're opening the system up to a lot more potential fraud. It's just easier, simpler, and fairer to charge the tax to everybody, rebate back to people the tax that was collected from them that they don't owe, i.e. on their spending up to the poverty level, and just don't mess with all that, because one of the absolute beauties of the Fairtax is its simplicity, and you don't want to add any more complexity than you have to. So the prebate gets the job done. Why mess with all that other complex stuff that's just error-prone, fraud-prone, and, Congress critters will be jumping into that, changing that every time. So no. The exemptions and stuff is a bad idea.
Yeah. As Bob said, you're going to have, if you did that, you're going to have more lobbyists in there saying, first off, you have an exemption card. First off, that carries a certain stigma. My family is poor enough to have this special card. We don't want to do that. Plus, all right, other people have suggested, well, we'll make essential groceries tax-free. Well, how do you define essential groceries? Potato chips, are those essential? So you're going to have two halves of the store. This half of the store is for essential groceries, and that half of the store is for the other people. Now, so both of those ideas open the system up to a lot of fraud, and they open it up to a lot more lobbying by these K Street lobbyists. We don't want that. The prebate, the family consumption allowance is bulletproof, but because of its simplicity.
To play devil's advocate on that, the idea that, isn't the idea of a prebate also just as subject to the corruption of the human condition as kind of other plans? What do you think, what makes the prebate stronger or more or less corruptible? Obviously, I think anything can be corrupted by anyone, but what gives it that extra protective layer that you're talking about?
Well, in order to qualify for the prebate, every legal household will have to send in a form to the Social Security Administration once a year saying these are the Social Security numbers of the people in this household. And they will not let the same number be used in multiple places, so you can't keep the system that way. So it's really hard to gimme with that system.
Well, I wonder now if like the system, the only abuse I can really see the system sustaining is that, the only thing really can do with this, people are going to say, well, the poverty, it should be higher. The amount of money people are getting should be higher. And I think you're going to see some kind of effort to do that. Now, that's going to have its own economic consequences. I think that Congress is more than happy to spend more money, and that means more borrowing. But now we're getting kind of into different issues. So I guess I see... I can see it. I see the point. I see the effectiveness of it.
And you're right. I'm sure there'll be
simple and it works.
I'm sure there will be some congressmen who, when they debate this, say, it should be higher. But they're using government figures.
Yeah.
It's not like the Fairtax people just invested these figures on their own. They're using government poverty figures.
Yeah.
From the Health and Human Services. Kind of hard to argue with.
Amen. What about retirees? Here are people, I assume they're going to get this prebate. What about their benefits they're getting now? Should they expect any difference in income coming that they're currently getting?
Income probably, because most retirement distributions are subject to federal tax withholding. And so whether you make your money, whether you win your money, no matter how you get your money, there will be nothing withheld from you with the Fairtax, period. So the retirees will get the full gross amount of their retirement distributions. I know that the part of the Social Security I get is taxable. That would go away, so your Social Security payment would be higher. But again, you're not getting more money from the government. You're just getting more of your own money because the government's not taking it from you up front. And, of course, retirees are the same way as everybody else as far as buying things. The things they buy have the embedded cost of the tax system in it. That goes away for them. It goes away for everybody.
And they get the rebate, too.
And they get the rebate as well.
Wow. Sounds good.
Yeah,
Here's another a big advantage of the Fairtax. Used products are not subject to the Fairtax because somebody paid the Fairtax on that once when it was new. And this is a big deal for cars and homes, okay? So whether it's a retired couple like my wife and I, or it's a young couple just starting out, if they buy...
like my wife and I.
Okay. and if it comes time to get a car, they can legally avoid the Fairtax if they buy a used vehicle. Same with a house. With a house, it's a big deal. So for the people that are struggling to get by, whether they're young people starting out or seniors that are, just getting by, the Fairtax is going to be a good deal. Like Bob said, there'll be no income tax taken out of their Social Security or retirement distribution. They will get the prebate, and they have the option of buying used stuff. So, what's not to like about that? Well, what happened?
What about so I mean you mentioned houses and cars. Houses specifically definitely are one of the biggest investments I think people ever make in their lives. How would that affect the new housing markets? Do you think that would, now that you're incentivizing used homes as opposed to new homes, do you think that might affect the construction of new homes?
Right now,
I don't really think so, because the new homes now, the price of new homes now have all this embedded tax in them. So the prices of new homes are not going to go up dramatically over what they're already doing now. You just get a saving if you buy one that's a pre-existing home.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And of all the home sales in this country, close to 90% of them are pre-owned houses. For some reason, we don't call them used houses. Okay.
Yes.
Pre-owned houses, lived-in houses, whatever. Mm-hmm. But so it's only a little over 10% that's new construction. The rest of it is pre-owned. So it's it's going to be a big benefit to them.
Gotcha.
Now, let me point people to Fairtax.org. That is the website of the national group according to Fairtax. There are a lot of papers, a lot of FAQs and white papers and stuff there that will address these questions like you're raising. How's it going to affect retirees? How's it going to affect young people? How's it going to affect this group or that group or other? All of that information is up there in a lot more detail than we've got time to get into here talking with you.
Yeah,
but that is available at the Fairtax.org. If you just go up there and read the FAQs, you will be amazed at how much information you can absorb up there.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're definitely at the end. In the description, I'll put all that stuff in there. I'll put links to your stuff and Fairtax.org and anything else we can put up there. But I think let's keep pressing on. I got some more questions for you guys. Ultimately, how will this be all enforced? We're getting rid of the IRS. Obviously, the businesses are collecting this money. Who do they make the payments to? How do we know they're paying the right amount? There has to be some kind of.
That's an easy one. The state's departments of revenue who enforce the state-level sales taxes will enforce the fair tax.
Excellent.
Very simple. The states will collect the fair tax from the retailers, and the states will remit it back up to a small office in the Treasury Department to receive it. I say the IRS goes away because there's no income tax to enforce. But your question is, the states are going to do that. So instead of one enforcement agency, now you've got 50, and instead of millions of points of interest that they have to keep their eye on, it's a lot fewer retailers than there are individuals.
Absolutely, and it's much. You got to think it's much more manageable for 50 state governments to handle business within their own state. It's almost just it just makes more sense. You think that one body could govern the entire country.
Something the states are already doing. They are already I think 5 of them don't, but 45 of the 50 states have a sales tax already. So the mechanism to collect a sales tax from the retailer is already in place. The software vendors who do all this point-of-sale software, all that stuff is in there. So even those states that don't have their own sales tax, their point-of-sale software can be, modified fairly quickly. It's already there already. But the capacity to do this is already there, and it's going to be largely by computer, and the states will enforce it. And so if somebody's not paying the fair tax, the state's going to come after the retailer, not the individual.
That's right. That's right. So think about evasion. I mean, evasion is going to go down to practically nothing. Because how do you evade a sales tax? If you go into a Walmart and buy a big screen TV and tell them, I don't want to pay the sales tax on that. How's that going to go over?
Well, I think this is the benefit of it being kind of a part of the cost of it. So now it's like, it does make it that much more difficult.
But also, the retailers are incentivized to charge the tax because they will get to keep. It's a fairly small percentage, but they will get to keep a fairly small percentage of everything that they collect in fair tax. So it's much to the retailer's advantage to make sure they charge it, not that they help people evade it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that way they keep themselves out of jail. That's always important.
That'll work.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought you had something to say. How politically viable is the fair tax? Where does it stand today? Is it politically in terms of passing?
Politically, well, we've got like 40-some co-sponsors out of 435 members of the House. And we've got an entire major political party that says if you support this, you're not going to get any support from us in your reelection thing. So it's really a tough road politically, simply because the lobbyists are so entrenched up there, and the lobbyists don't want this. You know, they want to be able to continue buying favorable tax treatment for their clients. Mm-hmm. So it's a really tough sell, because the Congress critters have been milking the system for fun and profit for decades, and they're getting away with it because nobody's watching. So, it will not be advantageous to the political class to do this. It will be the greatest transfer of power from the government back to the people in my lifetime when this passes. But, it's a tough road to go. And until it becomes a winning issue at the ballot box, i.e. enough people understand the fair tax and say, if you don't support it, I'm not voting for you, that's when it's going to get taken off. But I think what we're going to see also, there are a couple of states that are looking at implementing a fair tax, system in their state and getting rid of their state income tax. Alabama and Georgia come to mind immediately. And when those state level taxes work and they see in real life how well this works, then it'll be a lot easier politically to get it on the national stage.
Yep. There's another issue, too. As Bob says, the political climate in Washington right now is not ripe for the fair tax. However, there's one thing that they're ignoring right now that they will not be able to ignore for much longer, and that's what we already mentioned, the evasion rate. Mm-hmm. All right. 2 years ago, the Americans for Fair Taxation commissioned a revamp of a study, a renewal of a study on evasion of the income tax. Mm-hmm. And there's a professor in Jacksonville here in Florida who's an expert on that. He did a study in 2012. He had to update the study, and that's where we got the figures. Like I said, I've heard 21%. We know a CPA in Colorado who thinks it's closer to 25%. Mm-hmm. So 1 in 5 people, or maybe 1 in 4 people, are evading the income tax. Well, what happens when it becomes 1 in 3 and 1 in 2? Congress cannot ignore the evasion problem much longer. It's going to get out of control. All right. So that's something that may force them. And the other thing is that if we had somebody who was successful in repealing the 16th Amendment, well, then we're in like Flint, because there's nothing else. There's nothing else in town. The fair tax will be the only game in town. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so actually, it does sound like there are some good avenues there. And I definitely know there used to be I was reading in one of Mark Levin's original books, Liberty and Tyranny, it was, where he talks about how this federalist system where, I want to say it was, I can't remember the state, it was a Midwestern state, had a welfare program that was so successful that it not only became a model for other states, but it also became the model for the federal government as well. I mean, that idea of kind of doing it starting at the state or local level first actually might be a more viable, avenue, as opposed to just trying to get it done at the federal level without a good example to look at. What do you guys think?
Hopefully we can change the political climate and get more Congress people on board, realizing that supporting this is going to be a winning issue at the ballot boxes. We had a thing in Florida here during the last gubernatorial election where one of the primary candidates attacked the other one, saying, "You support this huge sales tax." And the fair tax people here responded to that in droves. And the fair tax supporter actually went from being 20 points down to winning by 20 points. It was
that's right.
Huge change around.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. When people become aware of this, they like it. When they study it, and as Bob and I always end our show every week, once you understand it, you'll demand it, and that's exactly what happened. Yep. A candidate who is a fair tax co-sponsor, if he or she strongly defends their position, their constituents will back them up. And that's what happened here in Florida, big time. Just like Bob said, this guy went from being down by 20 points to winning by almost 20 points. It was a tremendous turnaround.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, of course, we got to be fair here. All that was not due to fair tax
influence. A presidential, presidential endorsement had something to do with that as well. But the Fairtax message got through to the guy that was doing it. It's, we pulled the ad. We're not doing that anymore.
That's right. Yeah, because some of our Fairtax volunteers and board members met with that guy who was demagoguing the Fairtax, and he said, in chagrin, he says, "We've heard from the Fairtaxers. We're pulling the ad." He learned his lesson, and he lost the election.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. In my own experience, when I was talking to our local congressman here in Connecticut, it's one of those things where you send an email out. I messaged him back a couple times. I called the office, I think probably twice, and I got a call back. And obviously, I was working at the time. I wasn't able to get it, but the person left a voicemail and just, the whole, we took a look at it. Your question was kind of detailed. We don't agree with the Fairtax because it's regressive. Goodbye. And then, you go to call him back, and of course the number is, disconnected or however, it doesn't reach anybody. It goes to some dead end.
Yeah.
So it's just unfortunate that, and that's not only him, just talking to people on the street, it's always the same thing. They always think it's regressive. They don't know it's almost like they haven't read it. They say they read it, but it's almost like they haven't.
But people who think the Fairtax hurts the poor don't understand it because they don't know how the prebate works.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
And there's a great website that Bob and I always talk about in our show, Popvox, POPVOX.com, and you can weigh in on any proposed legislation that there is. And we ask you to go on there. You have to register. You have to tell them your name and your address, because that way they know who your congressman is and who your two senators are. And then when you make a comment, like you go and search out H.R. 25, the fair tax, and you say, I like the fair tax because it's this and this. And you'll see of the few people, and it's very few, the few people who don't like the fair tax, it'll be, one, it's regressive and hurts the poor, which means they haven't really studied the fair tax. Or two, it's not 23%, it's 30%, which, as we said before, is not an argument at all. I mean, it's the same amount of money. So typically, and there really are like 5% or less. The fair tax enjoys quite a good popularity on Popvox. So...
Excellent. Yeah, like I said, we'll link to all this stuff in the description. That definitely sounds like something worthwhile doing. Just thinking about the prebate and kind of linking out to Republicans and Democrats and trying to network and get people on board. We have a Democrat presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, who is really famous, I think, at this point for his ideas for this universal basic income. And I'm wondering if do you guys see any real substantial difference between a UBI like he proposes and a fair tax?
Yeah.
Except that I think the only difference I can see is that we actually have a mechanism to kind of fund it, where I don't know he's kind of saying we'll take our current system and just somehow spend or somehow pay for it.
Yeah, there's a big difference, all right? He's still depending on an income tax. He's still depending on getting income tax from somebody else and doling it out as a universal basic income. It still centers around the fair tax. It'll never work, all right? But the fair tax, the prebate is, you can compare it probably best as to a tax refund. Everybody will be paying the prebate when they go to the store and buy a new product or pay for a service. Everybody will across the country, whether they're here legally or not. Everybody will. Okay, so out of the proceeds that come from the fair tax, then this prebate will be returned to the legal households. Again, depending on the number of people there. There's a huge difference. The prebate is only designed to reimburse them for the tax they paid on the basic necessities. That's a completely different concept than here's enough money to live on. All right, because it's not enough money to live on.
Yeah.
You can't raise a family on $648 a month, a family of four. It's not possible. So the concept of the prebate is very different than the concept of a UBI. UBI is just another way to make people beholden to the federal government.
Yeah, because the incentives are a little different, I would say.
Yeah.
With that said, I'm wondering, so we've said a couple times here now that the rate, the actual rate itself, is what would be needed to kind of deal with current government spending levels. Does it also include the amount of money that we would need to now start, that we need for the prebate, essentially? Would we need additional money to start giving out this prebate? In addition to what we're already spending?
No, the economists that designed this thing arrived at the 23% figure as the rate, inclusive rate for the Fairtax. That is the rate that will make the same amount of money for the federal government. Included in that calculation is how much they're going to give back in prebate. Again, the Fairtax revenue is only Fairtax paid on spending above the poverty level. So that's what they looked at as far as how much money it'll bring in. It will bring in, more than the federal government is making now, but then they give out the prebate and make it a wash.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Go ahead.
The way they came up with this is that the Americans for Fair Taxation, which was formed in 95, and the legislation was first submitted in 99, they've spent over $20 million of privately funded research. How much does it have to be? How will it affect this? How is it going to be collected? All right. Well, they've spent a huge amount of money, a lot of it donated by corporations and individuals, but all privately funded to answer all these questions. For instance, that evasion study that I mentioned in 2017, I believe I was told that study cost about $45,000. Okay. Yeah, well, that's the way it goes. And so over the years that they've spent over $20 million. So these folks know what they're talking about. This is not just pie in the sky. This is all backed up with research.
What are the...
And I guarantee the prebate is... Think how much money that the government spends on the IRS that is no longer needed to be spent. They have a multi-billion-dollar budget.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So by getting rid of the income tax, we save that money.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, so it seems that this tax rate is really important. What are the requirements needed to change the rate? Is it like a simple majority in Congress? What's the process for that?
Changing the tax rate would be just passing a bill in Congress, which would require both houses and the president's signature.
Do you think that might be one of the weaknesses, though? Is that a potential weakness, that it's so that can be easily changed, kind of depending on how Congress feels, the president?
They can. But it's the same with the income tax. They can change the income tax rates the same way, so that's a wash.
But what they're doing now is that they're passing these changes to the tax code. Do you realize that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that they passed in 2017 had over 500 changes to the tax code built into it? Yeah.
Nope.
And they're doing this, and like we said, they have all these proposals to change the tax code. They're changing the tax code at the rate of just about one day that they're in session. If they want to change the fair tax, okay, income tax goes away, the IRS goes away, the fair tax is the law of the land, and if Congress finds it necessary, maybe because of a war or something, that they want to change the fair tax rate, they have, first off, it's open. Everybody knows about it. Secondly, they can't target one segment. Everybody is affected by that change. The rich, the poor, the in-between, everybody. So if they are going to make a change, they're going to make a change on everybody. And that's going to be a much harder sell than what they do now by sneaking around behind our back.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just as an interesting point, what do you guys think are either the weakest parts of the bill or maybe the hardest selling points of the fair tax?
The weakest part of the bill is that it's so easily demagogued by people who either don't understand it or are intentionally trying to mislead people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's true.
The biggest problem with it.
Yep.
Like,
as far as how it works and how it will be administered and what it'll do, there are no downsides to getting rid of the IRS.
There are no downsides to getting your full paycheck every month. There are no downsides to getting a tax refund every month. So the only downside to the fair tax is that people who don't like it, like the lobbyists and Congress-critters, can tell truths, half-truths, or just flat-out bald-faced lies about it and get away with it.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I guess, to kind of take the devil's advocate position is one of the things I've been studying. This is kind of, it's a little bit outside of the subject, but I've kind of gone back to just kind of the good principles of government, separation of powers, limited scope of what it can and can't do, and how we define those things. And, you can take something like as simple as the Constitution itself, where you have Article 1, Section 8, it grants Congress roughly 18 to 20 powers, how you can, depending how you count it. And how we go from this very clear language, we have Federalist Papers that articulate it. We have Anti-Federalists who make arguments against it, and this dialogue between them. You have notes from the convention. You have a lot of documents, original documentation that describes the original intent of these guys that we should be using to interpret these kind of things like the Constitution. And yet, here we are a couple hundred years later, we find ourselves in a completely different situation so far from the Constitution. One of the things I've been trying to think of is, when you're designing bills, it's almost like when you design laws, they're designed in a way that's very static, where it's like, well, if you just take what's on the bill right now and we apply it right now, it'll work today. But then it gets, once we pass it, it enters this realm, this dynamic realm of human activity and the imperfect human condition. And I just think when I read it, I do see some areas where I think we could tighten things up and kind of make, like, for example, a good example of this is saying that Congress can't make the tax rate more than X, for example, or I was going to say below, but no, it wouldn't make sense. The range that Congress can do it, like with a simple majority, would be they can raise it from, some anywhere between 10 and 20%. If they want to go beyond that, they need 2/3. If they want to go beyond that, they need the state's involvement, something of that nature, just to put more limits. That way, you have a more understandable government, you have a more accountable government, and it makes it kind of limits what they can do, which I think is always a good thing for the preservation of liberty.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you can figure that out, I'll vote for you.
Well, I'm working on it. I've been writing stuff. I've been doing a lot of research on this kind of stuff to kind of, to not just apply to this, but to kind of apply to all laws where you're going to grant a body of government some kind of power. Because, inevitably, in my opinion, it just gets abused. No matter what, you could say, hey, Congress, you're allowed to do this one thing. 100 years later, they're doing a million things. It's just, I think it's the nature of our existence. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? With that in mind.
Well, right now, the national group and all the state groups, they're concentrating on trying to get the bill passed. Whatever it takes. After it passed and signed by a president and it becomes law, then what we need to do is continue our vigilance. We have to watch Congress like a hawk.
Absolutely.
Which actually is pretty easy to do. There's one website that we already mentioned, congress.gov. Yep. You can go there every day and check out, what is Congress proposing now? If they're proposing any changes to the revenue bill, whoa, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Hold on there, Congress,
Yeah.
So we have to be vigilant. So I see the AFFT and the state organizations switching from, okay, we need to get this thing done, to, okay, we need to protect it. We need to pay attention and make sure it doesn't get corrupted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've said in a previous podcast that I did, kind of an intro to the Fairtax, where I said, listen, I do kind of have some issues with it, but nevertheless, I'm willing to suffer any consequence that it would be right now, because A, we could probably modify that with a simple amendment later on, and B, getting rid of the IRS in the current system, I think, was just the good outweighs the bad,
Oh yeah.
Without a doubt.
No doubt.
I support 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a whole lot more good with the IRS than there. And frankly, because Bob and I have been doing this so long. And then the president of the AFFT, Steve Hayes, he's been at this since the early 90s. When Steve does a presentation, he introduces himself as, I'm Steve Hayes, and I'm a recovering tax attorney. because that's his profession. He's a tax attorney. And after graduating from college and working on the income tax, and he quickly realized, wow, some people have a huge advantage with this income tax and other people don't.
Yeah,
and that really got him interested. So he's been involved with the Fairtax, the idea of a consumption tax since before the Fairtax was born. And he can tell you some tremendous stories.
Oh, I'm
but
sure.
So and I think that organization and the state organizations, like I said, after it's passed, we have to kind of reform ourselves into I was going to say vigilante, but that's not the word I want.
Watchdog.
Yeah, watchdog. Thank you. Very good. We have to transform into a watchdog organization. Yep. So.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit more about the Fairtax radio that you guys are on. How long you been doing it? What's your viewership like? What's your reach? Give me the details. Tell us where people can find it.
Okay, but this started out several years ago. I saw a Facebook post from an internet broadcaster in Texas that was looking for content for it was the Leading Edge Radio Network was the name of it. So I just asked him, would you be interested in carrying a program dedicated to educating people about the Fairtax? He said, sure. So we started doing that just as a podcast or just as a program on Leading Edge Radio Network. Not long after we started, they came back and says, oh, we can't let you do this for free anymore. You're going to have to pay for the time. Well, we don't have any budget. See you later. And we ran across something called Spreaker, like speaker with an R in it, Spreaker, that is just really automates putting out podcasts in an incredible way. So we were doing that. And about a year or so ago, some friends are on in Gainesville who are big Fairtax supporters and have a lot of different businesses, one of which is a TV recording studio, said, hey, would you guys like to come up and do a video show? So at his invitation, we did the video show, and that lasted for about a year until one of their tax advisors says, wait a minute, these guys aren't 501c3s. We can't donate our studio time and write it off to them anymore, so we can't do that.
Wow.
So we bought our own video equipment, and now we just stream ourselves to Facebook, and Ron does most of that. He can tell you where it all goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. It goes to, we subscribe to a streaming service, and so, like Bob says, my living room becomes the studio for a couple of hours. Bob drives up, like I said, Marion County is very large. It's about a 40-minute drive between our houses. Bob drives up here. We record two half-hour shows, and then I do the post-production work. Like, we mentioned Pop Box. I'll put that on the bottom so people can see it. I superimpose a Fairtax logo behind us. And so we do all of this, and then it streams to Facebook. We have settled on Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern for the live stream. Even though it's pre-recorded, the comments are live. So it's streamed from our service to Facebook.
Oh, okay.
And then people tune in and they ask questions, make comments, and we respond to them in live fashion. It also goes to YouTube because we've got a YouTube channel, and we've got a couple other places called Periscope, which I know very little about, but I have it streamed to Periscope. And there's a new one that I've discovered called Parler, which I'm just learning about. Our intention is the Florida Fairtax board meeting was in June, and they voted in favor of hiring somebody that knows the internet that can help us get our message out. Now, one of our board members, Mike, knows how to do this, and as soon as he completes all his eye surgeries this month,
oh, wow.
He said they're going very well. He said the first one went very well. He's got better than 20/20 vision now. He says by the time I get the second one done, I think I'll have X-ray vision. But anyways, when he gets done with that, he's going to look into finding some person who knows the internet that can help us get our message out. Because I think we have a pretty good show. It's a half hour each week, so it's not real long. But we need help in getting it out there better because Bob, Bob is an experienced radio DJ, and I'm a retired high school teacher and ex-truck driver. And, we don't know that much about marketing on the internet, I have to be honest.
Yeah, it's an art. Let me tell you, I'm still figuring it out myself.
Yeah.
So,
but our analytics say we are heard in Germany and Indonesia and India. I mean, we are literally the world famous Fairtax guys.
Awesome. No, that's great. Are you getting we're talking hundreds, thousands?
That's interesting to watch. Who in Indonesia is watching Fairtax Power Radio?
If you don't mind me asking, what is your viewership like? Is it in the thousands or what hundreds?
It's for on Facebook. It's over 1,000 usually each week. Yep. We get. I don't understand. We'll have about 20 live viewers, but then when the program ends and you go back to the Facebook page, it says 600 or 700 people viewed this video.
Huh,
so I don't understand Facebook, and that's why we need some help.
Yeah, there's people who make careers out of this kind of stuff, this social media marketing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's our goal. Without Bob, this wouldn't happen because he's the one that knows how to make it sound right? He's an experienced radio DJ. He knows how to do this, and I just kind of follow along. And we both love the Fairtax. We're both passionate about it, and that's why we're doing it. So we just keep on doing it, and we'll do what's necessary. Fortunately, we're here in Florida, and we have a board that is supportive of us. They didn't bat an eyelash when we told them, look, the studio told us we can't come back anymore. So we're proposing to buy a video camera and a backdrop and the necessary equipment to do our own production. And they said, yeah, absolutely. It didn't cost that much to begin. Yeah. Yep. So we're doing our own production. I just, once we get the video recording, I put it on my computer. I go to the movie program. I stick this in. I add this. I put a beginning on it. I put an ending on it, and voila, you got a video.
Awesome. No, that's so cool. I'm great. You guys it's just great that you're doing that. Any final thoughts? I think on the Fairtax. Something we didn't cover. Anything that you wanted to mention?
Well, if you get questions from your listeners, please feel free to contact us.
Absolutely.
And by email or whatever, and we'll be glad if somebody comes up with a question that we did not handle today, which is quite possible. Just don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll do our best to respond.
Absolutely, yeah. We should definitely do this again. It's a ton of fun.
I just said, if you like more money in your pocket and you don't like filling out tax returns, you like the Fairtax.
Yeah. Whether you know it or not.
Yep. There you go. You're a Fairtax fan and you don't know it.
Yeah, awesome. Yep. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on.
We appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Oh, no, the pleasure's all mine. We'll definitely do it again sometime. And, yeah, what we'll do is send me an email with all your links, all the stuff. I'll send something I'll put on. But, yeah, if I'm missing anything, send me all your stuff, all your links where people can find you at. And then that way they can check you out. And, yeah, again, tons of fun. We should do it again.
There is one last
All right, we'll do it. Thank you so much.
There's one last website, fairtaxguys.com. Just fairtaxguys.com. That's where you don't have to subscribe or join. That's where people can go and see our videos.
Okay, excellent. Awesome. We'll all post it in the description. There'll be a ton of links on this episode.
Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks so much, guys. Thanks for coming on.
Well, Steve, thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Our pleasure.
Yes, till next time.
Thank you.